Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid and a cold, rainy morning ramble. I want to give a big shout out to Lisa W., one of our subscribers. Lisa does have a last name, and it is on her user ID, but I know I would severely mispronounce it, and it does start with a W, so I'm just going to call her Lisa W. Lisa left a comment just this morning that kind of motivated me. I mean, I was coming up here anyway, but I kind of didn't know what to talk about because I knew what I wanted to talk about, but I'm always leery to talk about what I really want to talk about because it sounds so crazy. But Lisa kind of gave me a little nudge, a little vote of confirmation that Lisa herself and her husband are my kind of crazy. And several folks here over the last 24 hours have mentioned, I guess I said yesterday in a morning ramble, that there are about 2,000 of you folks who listen to these rambles out of our 67,000 alleged subscribers. Several folks have said, hey, you know, I watch every day. I never comment on YouTube videos, but I wanted to let you know I'm part of that 2,000. Thank you so much for all of you. And the other 65,000, you're welcome to join in at any time. So Lisa is commenting. She says, my husband and I love to watch all your videos. We're glad you're here. We watch every day. And I'm thinking, oh, she's making me feel good. Tell me more, Lisa. Tell me more. And then she says, and by the way, my husband's bipolar, so I can really relate to you and dearly. And I'm like, what? She's going on. She says he hasn't had an episode for a couple of weeks, but us watching you makes us feel better, makes me feel better about our situation, and it allows me to kind of cope with him. And so I'm thinking, wow, thanks, Lisa. But you know what? She didn't come out and call me that, but you know, and this is nothing I don't already know. So let me tell you, today's talk, I guess, about what is today's talk about? It's kind of about not only embracing our crazy, but embracing those who are willing to also embrace our crazy and accept us for our crazy and love us for our crazy. Because guys, you know what? You know what Lisa does for her husband? She allows him to be himself. She doesn't say, I will love you if you do this, that, and the other, which as we know is called conditional love. She just says, you know what? You're crazy, but I accept it. I love your kind of crazy. And when he has his episodes, she just kind of sits back and stays out of the eye of the storm to the best of her ability. And yes, that's what Dearly does too. And I made a video months ago called, I don't know, my wife is the most special woman greatest woman I've ever known, and here's why. And I just talk about, I talked about the sacrifices she made. She worked full-time 8-10 hours a day for $2 a day in the Philippines so I could pursue my writing, which was our only way out as we saw it, and which actually worked. And it wasn't so much because I believed in myself and I did the work, but it's because I had a soulmate who believed in me also and made the sacrifices she needed to make for our family to make it happen. And it actually happened. But now, before we even got to that point, let me tell you, for some time, I was thinking in my head, you know, our only way out of here, our only way to the U.S. is if I become so good at what I do, which was writing, which I'd done for many years and which I'd never, ever been really good at, enough to earn any money to speak of and whatnot. But I said, this is really my only option. This was during the height of the Great Recession. I mean, I was crazy, kind of like I am now. Just, it was, I didn't hide it so well back then. I kind of acted out on my insanity. Now it's cleverly disguised, and I just do different things instead of like going on drug binges and drinking binges and doing stuff that's not legal. I come up with really crazy ideas, like one I'm going to tell you about later today. I'd go into detail now, but it's just too long, so I'm going to make a whole video on this. And Lisa W. inspired me to actually, I've been carrying this map around in my pocket for a while, and I've actually used it, and it's actually worked. I've come up with this crayon-based deer repellent. That's a map of my property. The gold mine is a soon-to-be apple-flavored salt lick for a big 8-point buck named Davy Crockett. And the question mark, well, it's because of a property boundary the deer didn't know about, and it also could be there because I think I misspelled the word repellent. So it could have a multiple purpose. But anyway, Lisa's comment gave me the courage to actually get out here today in the rain here after I have some breakfast and tell this story about this deer repellent. It's going to be the craziest big buck story you've ever heard. And as you know, I don't kill the deer on our property. I don't allow others. So the good news is the deer doesn't die. We just come to an understanding. And so far it's worked. And he's well on his way to getting that apple-flavored salt lick. So anyway, what's my point of this? Here I go, rambling again. But I guess that's why we call this a morning ramble. Okay, so I finally say to Dearly, honey, I really think, I like this guy named Stephen King. He's one of my favorite authors, as is Michael Crichton. A lot of that's because in the Philippines, it's crazy. All these people here in the U.S. and Western nations, they donate books and clothes and shoes and all this stuff to all these different places, and then they're shipped over to the third world countries. And I've got to listen, a lot of times, I'm not saying all the time, I'm saying there are times when once those items get to those other countries, they end up in the hands of people who sell them to shopkeepers and shop owners, and they don't end up going where these well-intended Western people think they're going to go. They end up at what's called the ukay, and that's Tagalog or Visayan one for black market. So for some reason, when we go to the black market to buy all these donated goods from the West, there were all these Michael Crichton books. And so honestly, that's how I got into buying Michael Crichton, or into reading Michael Crichton so much. You could get them for 10 pesos, which is about 20 cents. And they had every book Michael Crichton ever wrote, so I got them all. I think there's one or two I haven't read, but I've read all the rest. And I really enjoy, this is the guy that wrote Jurassic Park. But he was writing back since the 70s. And I think his first one, I can't remember. But the point is, I said to Dearly, honey, I think the only way for us to get out of here is for me to get so good at this, I can earn enough money to get us out of here, back to the U.S., and she goes, okay, we'll do it. And I thought, well, honey, that's crazy. You sound crazy. And she said, why do I sound crazy? And I said, because I sound crazy. I'm sitting here, I read this book several times called On Writing by Stephen King, in which he says the only thing you really have to do to be good at writing is to read a lot and write a lot. And that made me feel good because I don't have an English lit degree. And I said, well, honey, this guy says this, and he's pretty good at writing. She says, well, then do it. Then read a lot and write a lot and be successful and get us to the U.S. And I was like, well, honey, that's just crazy. My idea is crazy, and you sound crazy because you support my crazy idea. And she says, well, just do it. She goes, who wrote that book? And it was a Michael Crichton book at the time I was reading. I said, it's Michael Crichton. I guess that's what it has to do with this. She said, he's a man. You're a man. What's the difference? He read a lot and wrote a lot like that other guy, like that King you talked about said. Do it. I was like, okay. So she went to work for her mother's Sorry store, working 8 to 10 hours a day for $2 a day. And the rest is history. That happened for many years, and then many years later, we were able to come here, and here we are. So it's not just that I embrace my crazy and I act on it with the deer map and the deer story and the way I've figured out how to keep this big 8-point buck around here I've named Davy Crockett to keep from destroying my trees. He got a few this year, but he hasn't gotten the rest because of a crazy idea I've implemented. But I can only implement my crazy ideas because I have a partner who loves me for my crazy and doesn't always necessarily embrace my kind of crazy. There are times when she's making sure not to get in the eye of the storm as well, but she allows me to be crazy. She allows me to be who I am. Okay, I'm going to beat around some bushes here because there's certain people, well, I don't want to insult anybody, but there's a certain person that I never want to insult, especially publicly, because that person is important to someone, 3 people who is important to me. So out of respect and love for them, even though I've not seen them for many years and don't know if I ever will again, I will never disrespect this certain person. I was once involved with a certain person. That relationship ended, and it largely ended because I stopped drinking alcohol. I got sober, and I remained sober for 8 years until I relapsed, largely due to the Vicodin and the Percocet, all these drugs I got hooked on after the war when I was in the Army hospital. So I couldn't understand it because I'd gotten sober, and it was bringing about the ending of a relationship that I'd been in for many years. And so I was talking to someone much more knowledgeable than myself about these sorts of things. And he told me, he said, well, this relationship is ending because you got sober. And I said, this doesn't make any sense. I thought that drugs and alcohol was supposed to wreck marriages and relationships, not sobriety. And he laughed. He said, listen, he says, it's no accident we end up with who we end up with. And if we end up with someone at the time in our lives when we're abusing drugs or when we're drinking alcohol in excess, if we get clean, if we get sober, that'll often end that relationship. And this is not what you hear out there. You hear about, if you start drinking and you get out of control and you drink too heavily, it's going to ruin your marriage or your relationship. Well, if you're already like that when you get involved with that relationship and that marriage, and then you clean yourself up and you get sober, that's probably going to wreck the relationship. The guy used a great analogy. He said, look, let's say you go out and you buy a house. Let's say you buy a beautiful 2-story, let's say like here, 2-story farmhouse on 6 acres. You love it. It's what you want. You sign a contract. You agree to purchase it. You do. Let's say 4 years go by. You're loving your home. You wake up, and now all of a sudden you've got a 1/4-acre lot with a little brick rancher on it in a subdivision with houses so close to you, you can hit them with rocks. Are you going to be happy? So, well, of course not. And he said, no, and you'd have a right not to. You signed a contract agreeing that the product you wanted was a 2-story farmhouse on a 6-acre lot. You wake up one day and everything is completely different than what you agreed to. Would you want to get out of that contract? And I said, well, of course I would. But 4 years has passed. He said, it doesn't matter. You didn't get what you agreed to get. Same thing with the marriage. Same thing with the relationship. Once that change takes place and the product is no longer the same as what it is you agreed to purchase, you want out. And so here's what it is, what it boils down to. This is going in so many different places today. But when I was under the influence of alcohol, drugs, all these things, I could be controlled because all I cared about was my next drink, my next drug. When I'm not, I'm crazy. I'm a completely different type of crazy. And this crazy that I have, I self-medicated with that stuff. I choose not to self-medicate today. And I'm not on any other meds. I'm not qualified to give advice about medication or this kind of stuff, so I'm not. I'm telling you, I don't do this kind of stuff. In a last-ditch effort to save that relationship, I went to a psychiatrist and I said, well, I think I might need to be medicated. Psychiatrist said, why? I told him why. I said, my partner thinks so. I was drunk for many years, and I've been sober for a couple of years, and they think I'm maybe bipolar, maybe I'm manic, maybe I'm all these things. I need to be medicated. The shrink, who was a woman, talked to me for an hour, and she looked at me and she said, sir, you've got some signs of some manic disorder, bipolar. You know what? You're a little bit out there, but I don't think you need to be medicated. There is a reason that person wants you medicated, but it's not for any reason you should be medicated, and I don't think you should be medicated. I said, well, then why is this person pushing for me to be medicated? And she said, so she can control you. When you were on the booze, she could control you. Now that you're not, she can't. And so now, here I am with a beautiful woman who I am honored to call my wife, who supports me in my kind of crazy without any sort of medications needing to be involved. I get a crazy idea. I go to her with my crazy idea. I say, honey, do you think that that's crazy? And she says, yes, that is absolutely crazy. I'm like, oh, so I shouldn't do it. And she goes, yeah, you should do it. I love you and I love your kind of crazy. And your crazy idea may or might not work. Most of the time they don't, but look at the times they have. So it's not just that, this message is about loving our kind of crazy. This really message to my wife, I would say, I love you because you love my kind of crazy. Lisa loves her husband, and she accepts at most his kind of crazy, but I would be willing to bet she probably loves his kind of crazy too, because along with the bad also comes some good. So the thing about, we hear songs called Crazy Love, Crazy in Love. There's probably movies called Crazy Love. Crazy love is a two-way street. Crazy love is amazing, but only when you can find someone who is crazy enough to love your kind of crazy. And sometimes that person might be absolutely sane, and that sounds scary to someone like me. So it's not so much that they have to be crazy to love our crazy or your kind of crazy. It's that they just have to love you so much despite your crazy that they're willing to allow you to be yourself. And that, my friend, equals the craziest love you could ever imagine. And it's a beautiful, crazy thing. So I've gone on way longer than I intended to here today because I got to get down here and start telling you the craziest big buck story you've ever heard. It's true, at least in my mind as I see it, but it's worked. Doesn't that sound crazy? You'll understand when I tell that story later today. So I want to thank Lisa W. and everybody else who is here with us today on this cold, rainy, it's raining even though temperatures are just above freezing. If temperatures drop a degree, it's going to turn to sleet or something. But I wanted to come up here anyway. I want to thank each and every single one of you who are with us. Make sure to check back for more next time from here at Homesteading Off the Grid.